Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to another Patreon early access episode of That Nerdy Site Show, a weekly podcast where the team members from That Nerdy Site get together to talk about our lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and joining me for this month's episode, we have Logan Wilkinson. How you doing, Logan?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it is a beautiful Sunday in Austin, Texas.
Very nice. So this episode is going to be all about best and worst like TV series finales. So spoilers ahead for any number of shows. I'll try and keep a list. I'll try and keep a list of them and throw them in the in the description for the episode. So you know if we're gonna dive into territory where you don't want to talk about it or hear about it, you can certainly switch away. But before we do that, a little bit of housekeeping. If you like what you hear, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review the podcast everywhere you can. If you're feeling extra generous, if you are already listening to this, the time it goes out, you are already a supporter of us over on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. But if you're hearing this after the fact, because we put these episodes up a month early for our patrons and then for everybody else a month later, you can always, again, go support us at Patreon. Early access episodes like this are available to everybody for $1 over on our Patreon. So go do that, and you can help support us out, just like our wonderful monthly Patreon producers, Pam and Bev Larson, Sherry Starkey, Teresa Wilkinson, and myself, Trevor Starkey. This episode kind of spawned off of a wild tangent that Logan and I had on one of the recent episodes of That Nerdy Site Show, where we kind of dove into How I Met Your Mother as a tangent from something else even. It just kind of became like hey, that could be like a good self-contained topic for one of these early access episodes that we like to do every month. So I figure that's as good a place as any to kick it off. There is How I Met Your Mother. I think we both kind of from our conversation on that episode, feel it lives kind of in that worst territory kind of campaign. Do you have any kind of do you want to try and re-summarize our thoughts from the regular episode?
So I would definitely recommend everybody go listen to that episode as well, because that way we had a 30-minute conversation on How Much Mother's finale. But yeah, a quick kind of summation would be, I think, so I'm someone who very much was a big fan of How I Met Your Mother, and recognize its kind of faults by the latter few seasons where it kind of began to get a bit shakier in terms of the writing, but really genuinely liked the show a lot and was really kind of invested in that central mystery of who the mother is and Ted's kind of arc to be ready to kind of meet the mother. And I think the problem with the finale that we touched on in that episode is that it just undercuts really all of Ted's growth, but in order to get to that point, it has to also undercut all of Barney's growth, all of Robin's growth as a character. It unravels 9 years of all these character arcs and developments and their personal growth to get to the point to where Ted can find the mother, end up with the mother, have the two kids tell the story to, but also ultimately, spoiler alert, end up with Robin. And to me, at least, it very much felt like a finale where Carter Hayes and Craig, starts with a B, I think, the two creators had this idea of a cool twist 9 years ago. And then as the show kind of naturally developed and the characters naturally developed and they kind of went about making the show, they didn't allow the natural growth and the natural directions and turns that these characters took that they couldn't have expected when they first started it to influence the ending at all. So when the ending does come, it comes like a freight train, right? The way I described it on the That Nerdy Site show was, it feels like the episode was written years ago. I mean, especially it's really jarring if you watch the episodes leading up to it, and then you get there, and it's this is such a bizarre change of pace. They're all ultimately coming around the idea that Robin and Barney love each other so much, and they commit themselves to each other, and Ted finally lets go of Robin and is ready to finally meet the mother, and they meet, and they've kind of all come to the natural conclusion of their arcs, and they should kind of be rewarded for that in the last episode. And then the last episode almost immediately unravels Barney and Robin and it does in a way that feels so inauthentic because it just has to, it's like the last episode is covering so many years and it has like 50 minutes to do it all that nothing really feels earned in that way. Like it splits up Barney and Robin in the first like 15 minutes, and then Barney becomes like worse than season 1 Barney. Robin just vanishes for like the rest of the episode until like the end, basically. Like abandons the friend group. Ted is with the mother and is happy, and then they get to that last 5 minutes where it is such a jarring. Ted and the mother meet at the train station, and it's beautiful. The mother immediately then dies. He then is talking to his kids. They're like, we think you like Robin. And then he goes and like knocks on Robin's window basically and is with Robin. And it all happens in like 5 minutes so fast at the end. Like none of it's earned and none of it builds, and there's no time to kind of digest anything. And it's such a sudden change of pace. And I think for me, it's a bad series finale because it undercuts... I think it undercuts the central kind of premise of the show, which is How I Met Your Mother, and the kids are like, well, this isn't even a story about the mom. But B, because it undercuts, more than half of the cast growth and development, all because it was just this idea they had 9 years ago for the creators, and they didn't want to shake that, which, again, we kind of got into this last week of, like, part of you wants to kind of be like, applaud their commitment to be like, we had this idea 9 years ago and we like stuck with it all the way through. But then, at least for me, the other part of me is like, but that's not true because you had like this like, maybe we'll do this kind of idea, and then you didn't really know how you were going to get there, and then when you got there it didn't really make sense to do anymore, but you still just like wanted to do it, and it didn't feel natural anymore. And yeah, it is just such a classic way when I think back on like writing now of like how to not end a story is just How I Met Your Mother, basically.
Yeah, just going back real quick, Carter Bays and Craig Thomas were the creators there. And yeah, I think I summed it up when we kind of originally talked about it with the revelation that like had always been there, but like I'd never been able to kind of like concisely say it in the way that our conversation last week had really solidified, and that was the finale of How I Met Your Mother. In like its opening scenes, completely undercuts the final season.
Oh yeah,
of
also that
How I Met Your Mother.
Yeah.
Because the whole final season was built around the Robin and Barney wedding, and immediately divorces them. And then
so bizarre.
By the end of the episode, they've gone in and undercut the entire rest of the series. As a result. So yeah, that was kind of like a weakness. And then just kind of like the jokey little thing, because I don't think we need to really belabor the point for this one.
No.
Is we also never get to understand why Ted's voice transitions into Bob Saget for the story, and then back to Ted when he goes to get Robin at the end or whatever. So yeah, just kind of like a dumb little like. It was even that was like a like, what was the point of it being Bob Saget apart from stunt casting Bob Saget's voice as the narrator for Ted instead of just having Ted also do the voiceover to his kids.
It's the final jokey thing I'll say is that like like in hindsight it feels very much like the sequel trilogy of Star Wars, where like it was just very clear like they didn't actually have a plan to get there. They just said like, this would be a cool idea, I think, and then they were just like, I guess we'll figure it out, and like they never actually figured it out, and it became very apparent. And like I think for a few of the bad TV shows, that's gonna kind of be a recurrent theme where like, this is a cool idea, we'll figure out how to get there probably, and like they never end up doing it. And that's very much felt like the case with How I Met Your Mother. Yeah,
and to be fair, like I don't envy that position of like
sure.
a TV showrunner, like having to be able to like simultaneously write a story that could end at any time, given ratings or any of that kind of stuff, but also be stretched out as long as ratings see fit. Like that's a very tough tightrope to walk. So the shows that don't do it well, like it. Yeah, it's unfortunate, and especially like the ones that will be worst tend to be because they had such diehard fans that wanted a better a better moment of closure for their characters and all that stuff. And so not really getting that is almost like just a downside of like the success that the show had. So it's unfortunate that like it leaves a final taste in the mouth of these people. It's almost that the same kind of thing of like that thing in a video game where you're going along, you're enjoying a video game, and then the final boss comes up, and it's completely unlike anything else you've done in this video game, and it leaves like a weird bad taste in your mouth. Yeah, BioShock, Arkham Asylum, any number of those kinds of kind of like gamified finales.
Yeah.
You see a similar kind of like feeling from diehard fans of those kinds of games as well. Yeah. But enough about How I Met Your Mother. Do you have another show on your list that you want to kind of throw to next?
Another one that's on my bad finale list. It's not as bad as How Much Mother, only because like its ripple effects on like what the show actually was doing when it's like dire, but it is like a classic bad finale is Seinfeld. I mean Seinfeld finale is bad, but it's funny. I feel like because like I feel like when we were first growing up, it was like the one people talk about is like that's a terrible finale, and then like other like dramatic based shows or even like and How Much Much is a comedy, but like had like a kind of like like dramatic mystery at the heart of it, have come out and had maybe bigger flops in terms of like their central premise. I feel like Seinfeld has become more of just like that was a really bad 2-part episode, but like it didn't really impact the show ultimately. It's just Seinfeld's finale is like it is that weird thing of like the show had become so big that like I don't know what people wanted it to be, and it's also a consequence of its success, right? Like a lot of these shows had naturally huge audiences tune in for their finale. Only one show on the entire list that we're going to talk about had a bigger audience than Seinfeld watch the finale. I mean, there were, I think, something like 75 million people watched Seinfeld's finale. I mean, it was, this giant audience, which I think also helped give it that kind of negative reaction. Mm-hmm. It is just a mass stunt casting thing. And, like, part of me kind of is okay with that. Like, they were just like, we're going to bring out, like, a greatest hits thing. And that's kind of funny and endearing. But I think part of the issue with Seinfeld's is that, and Jerry has talked about this, and Larry David have both talked about the fact that, like, if they could have done it again, they probably wouldn't have done it like this. But, like, they were each just like, we didn't know how to end the show. Like, we knew we wanted to end it. Larry David had already left the show by that point. He had left, I think, after season 8. Either 7 or 8, and season 9 was the last season, and they like invited Larry David back in to like help correct the finale, and Jerry Seinfeld was very much burnt out and wanted to leave, and very much wanted to leave on top of the ratings as well, and so they were good to go, but it very much felt like they didn't kind of know what they wanted to do to end, like how do you end a show about nothing, and they really like made it about something. But, like, I think I'm making about something, and especially, like, making about, like, how terrible the characters are. It's, like, that's a funny joke, maybe, as, like, a one-off joke. But when it's split over, like, 2 30-minute episodes, it becomes less funny over time. But I also think the Seinfeld finale is a weird one because the central idea is really stupid, and it doesn't work. Like, them being put on trial for essentially being, like, the bad Samaritan law. And like end up going to jail kind of thing, and like none of that works, and it's not really funny, but like there are a surprising amount of really funny moments in the 2-parters still, especially in like the first part where it's much more about like them getting to the trial, and then getting to the city where they're at that has the law. Like I think one of the funniest moments of the finale, one of the funniest moments of like that kind of last season of Seinfeld is when they're on like the plane ride to get to that city, and the plane like starts like losing control, losing altitude, and going down, and Jerry and Elaine are like talking, and like I think it's maybe Elaine is getting to make like has like a confession to make to Jerry, like an I love you thing, and then like as she's getting to say it, the plane like suddenly fixes itself, and she's like, never mind, whatever, like people, they were going to give us like a long awaited like 9-year in the running like an I love you, and they're like, nope, not really, don't worry about it. And I thought that was like a funny like joke gag thing, and George is great in that entire first episode. Like Jason Alexander very much is still firing on all cylinders. But yeah, it very much is one that like doesn't really fit with the show as a whole. It's goofy and like not good ways. But even there's still good in that last episode. And as bad as it is, it's like, yeah, but like, it's 2 episodes and the like repercussions on the show as a whole are like so minimal.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I never watched Seinfeld, at the time, but I did, like, me and my family did tune in for that finale.
Yeah.
Like we were more of a Frasier family, if anything.
Ooh.
Like I watched Frasier because that's what my parents would be watching, at the time, kind of thing. And so occasionally, like I was much more watching whatever was on like TGI Friday or whatever. Like that was really what was on my TV, or I was playing video games or whatever. So like I wasn't really in tune of any of kind of the big finales of this time, like even Frasier or Friends or this, like those big, milestone kind of like series of that era of television. I was, if anything, I was like checking in and out. And so, yeah, Seinfeld was one I never really got into. And so like, even like thinking, like I remember like watching it and being like, this is such a dumb show. How is this like the most popular show on TV? I don't understand that at all. Yeah. And like it was very apparent that some of it had seeped into pop culture enough, because like I knew No Soup for You, like I knew that without having ever really watched the show or watched that episode or anything like that. But like so much of that was just kind of like inside jokes or like callbacks to previous characters and stuff. That I was just like, I'm lost here.
Yeah. If you had not seen the show, it is such a weird.
Yeah. So it's one that like it if anything, it was just like, okay, well, this cemented that I don't really want to watch this show. And having seen a handful of episodes since in just like reruns or whatever random other things on television, I'm just like, yeah, I never get the appeal of Seinfeld.
Oh, I love
it.
Seinfeld.
It feels like so there's a. I watched, and this came up briefly in this last that D Plus episode that I did as a solo episode for Frankenweenie, because Martin Short was in the short-lived series Mulaney, which is very, very much in the style of Seinfeld. It was John Mulaney doing a very Seinfeld-esque show where like he starts even, I think, doing like he does a little stand-up bit and then goes into an episode kind of tied into that theme. And I remember watching that and just being like, this isn't good. Like I want through lines and I want characters kind of like having more like cohesive arcs throughout seasons, as opposed to the Seinfeld era style, or the Seinfeld style of like, this is just going to be a show about whatever random, joke that Jerry kind of like thought of and then spun out into a full episode of something. So yeah, it's just never been my cup of tea, but yeah, it is, as you kind of mentioned, like one of the highest rated episodes of anything ever.
Yeah.
So certainly kind of and is often on that like worst of TV finales kind of list. And so as somebody that kind of came in with that experience of like, yeah, this wasn't a good I don't get the appeal of this show. I think it's kind of that like a fascinating look back on to just think of like me as, I don't know what I would have been, like 12 or something like that, watching that episode, not really knowing what was going on or understanding like the large majority of it, just being like, this, why do people laugh at this stuff?
The last thing I'll say about, because I love Seinfeld, I think is a masterpiece of a show. I think it's like just one of the greatest sitcoms ever made. But the finale, I think, and you actually kind of touched this a little bit, is it's like weirdly one of the most fan servicey finales ever, but like a fan service that doesn't work. Like if you are someone who like hasn't watched the show in a few years, or you were just like coming in to like check it out because it was such a blockbuster event, you would have no idea what was happening for like chunks of that episode. But if you were someone that had watched it from the very beginning and then watched the episode, you probably wouldn't like what you were watching. So like either like it was an episode made for the fans, but it was to an audience that wasn't just fans. And even if you were a fan, it wasn't really what you wanted, and it was like this weird thing, like the ultimate fan service episode that went bad, basically.
Yeah, yeah. So let's dive into a good one. I have one on my list. I don't know. I know we watched a little bit of it when I was out there last year for kind of our kickoff stream. But I don't know. Have you ever finished Parks and Rec?
So technically no, I've never yet to the end of Parks and Rec, but I love Parks and Rec as a sitcom, and I know, I don't know what the finale is, but I've seen clips of the finale because it was so big online.
Yeah, and we don't need to dive into like the specifics of that one, because a lot of these kinds of things can be, spoken of in somewhat vagaries, just in terms of like how it serviced the characters and stuff. But Parks and Rec immediately jumps to mind when I think of like great sitcom finales. Or great finales in general, because we're not gonna. The list isn't going to be confined solely to sitcom stuff. But yeah. Parks and Rec. For those that don't know, and this we touched on this a little bit in kind of the previous episode where we touched on this stuff as well, because all of this kicked off because I just finished New Girl, and we talked about how New Girl, the final season of New Girl, kind of has a 3-year time jump, just like Parks and Rec did. Both in both cases to avoid having kind of the central cast have to deal with like the bringing up a baby, so they jump to when the kid is a toddler, and they can go back to having their normal lives or whatever, their normal sitcom lives. And Parks and Rec did that same kind of thing for its final season. They did a little time jump, and so you have fun in that final season, kind of like piecing together what happened in the interim 3 years, because Leslie and Ron, for example, had this big falling out, and so part of the season ends up being like bringing them back together and finding out like what went wrong between those two. But the finale, the actual finale episode, kind of like takes, I believe it's also a 2-parter, and it takes the idea there of that 3-year time jump and kind of like extrapolates it out for each of its characters into like more flash forwards, kind of showing where everyone in this series kinds of winds up, and kind of their various happy ending moments. Or in the case of like a John Ralphio character, you see you have a cutaway gag to his flash forward being like them at like people at his funeral. And then you see him and his sister kind of like having faked his death to get away from somebody or something like that. And John Ralphio is still the worst. And it's everything is like very fitting to the characters and is fan service done right. It's these characters getting all these great moments. The
clip I've seen is Jerry's finale part. Yeah.
Jerry's is great because Jerry gets made like the mayor after being dumped on the entire series. He gets made mayor of the town and is beloved, and everyone rallies behind Jerry, and he gets to kind of have like this beautiful like I want to say that like they celebrate his 100th birthday, and his wife, who was Claudia Schiffer or something, like his wife, who was a model, and it ended up being one of the great jokes in the series was how Jerry got this beautiful wife, is still effervescent and young, while Jerry is in older age makeup kind of thing at his 100th birthday and stuff. It's there's just beautiful like send-offs for each of these characters. Each of these characters kind of get like the culmination of their natural story arcs. With Ben and Leslie in particular, both of them go on to have wonderful, successful careers in politics, and it's never like explicitly stated, but it's very much alluded that like one or both of them is the president. And even there, I'm pretty sure it's actually explicitly stated at some point that like they're the president, but you don't get from the scene which one it is. And it very much kind of becomes like there's this theory out there online that like both of them are at various points in that episode, the president of the United States, because they've both gone on, because when the series is naturally ending, Leslie's off running the parks department, and she's about to run for governor, I think, and Ben is like a sitting congressman or something like that. So that's it's a wonderful fan servicey thing that does a great job playing with that time jumping, because the whole thing is framed around the crew getting together at their office one last time, and kind of reminiscing on the past while we get to see all of these kind of future moments in these characters' lives. So it's just a beautiful, wonderful kind of feel good thing for that series, and a wonderful way to go. I highly recommend it. Anybody who's a fan of that series, certainly, but like even if you're not, you can probably get some enjoy. Like I think it's almost like the anti-Seinfeld, whereas like even if you don't know these characters, like you're gonna have these feel good moments in seeing these characters like live out their lives. You're maybe not gonna get the impact of that if you don't know them, but you're definitely not gonna it's not gonna leave a bad taste in your mouth like the Seinfeld series finale did.
I think it's Pushing Up Daisies, which is one that's talked about a lot, which is one that that shows like how each
Pushing
character
Daisies.
And it has a very similar vibe to that, like showing kind of the rest of these people's lives and kind of where they kind of end in that circumstance. I think it's such a good. Parks and Rec is always a show that ultimately I think is about. It is a optimistic and hope-filled show. And I think it's ultimately very fitting that that's the kind of finale that the characters get. I think it's super cleverly done, from the pitch, from like both my understanding and from what you've described. It is the perfect kind of finale for a show like that, right? And in that kind of vein, and here I think we split a bit more, but like it is a show very similar to me of like, I think The Office has a finale that is perfect for that show. And I know we don't agree on this as much, but like, I do think that The Office's finale is great for where that show was at that point in time, right? Like, Parks and Rec didn't do it, and I don't know if Modern Family, like what they ultimately did with like the documentary crew aspect of it, but like, The Office was kind of the first one. It was like the first American show that did that mockumentary format. And so I liked the fact that it was also kind of the one that did incorporate it into everything as well, right? And having it end with like the documentary finally airing and them all kind of coming back together one last time at the office and showing where everyone is. I think in The Office, it's like 18 months later, roughly, something like that, like 2 years. It all worked really well for me, right? And especially in the context of like that last season, which I liked, some people don't. But having Jim and Pam be reconciled before we get to that finale, having Dwight and Angela get married, bringing back Michael one last time, like there was so much to kind of, I think, enjoy in kind of the home stretch of The Office, and the finale too. Like I just think it is it brings these characters to natural conclusions and sees them off in happier places, and I like that it incorporates the documentary side of things and brings that to a close and has that air, right, which is something that they also borrowed from the British Office, but in a very different way. And so I always really enjoyed how The Office ended. Like, it felt very authentic to what that show was and what it was trying to kind of build in its tiny little corner in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And just the arcs, I think, of all the characters, right? Like, where Jim started, where he goes, where Dwight started, where he goes, where Pam to where she goes. Like, all the characters felt very much like, this is where I would kind of want you to be ending right now, I think. So I always really enjoyed The Office's ending.
Yeah, and I we talked about that again briefly in the previous episode, and I ultimately, like, I could have done without the framework of like embracing that the documentary crew was a real documentary crew. But I do think that finale has a lot of wonderful, kind of beautiful touchstones honoring and celebrating kind of the history of the show. Yeah, bringing Steve Carell back.
That's like, what she said.
Yeah, even lots of like other characters that, because I a year or so back, like, I went through and rewatched all of The Office on Netflix or something like that, and I had forgotten how long, like, BJ Novak and Mindy Kaling had been away from the show.
Yeah, they weren't there for the entire last season. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like seeing them, pop back in it, even that, like, because I think even they were gone even before that final season. Like I think they left around the same time like Michael did, or something like that. They're gone for like the last couple seasons, and it's like it's almost weird that I had forgotten about their absence. But again, also like when Michael left, like I largely stopped watching the show at the time, kind of thing, just because I was focused on other things. And the idea of James Spader coming in, I was like, I didn't really like the Robert California character, period. So it seemed like a decent enough point to just be like, like the show can have, in my mind, quote unquote, ended when, Michael goes off with Holly. It's a beautiful fitting send off for Michael.
Yeah.
There's even this like subheader kind of in this context of like, series finales that weren't really the series finales. You have stuff like that. You have like the Scrubs, almost final, the finale before the show got repicked up or something like that. You have those kinds of moments. Like Chuck has a ton.
I was going to say, you talk about Chuck all the time.
We'll dive into. But yeah, the actual finale, is centered around both the reunion of everybody coming back after, and kind of doing that panel discussion for whoever after the documentary had aired, mixed with everybody being in town there for Dwight and Angela's wedding, is a beautiful kind of like send off to the characters of that show. So absolutely, I just think Parks and Rec thrives because it didn't have those like weaker seasons in it. Like Parks and Rec, especially like in the middle of their run, has like a good season and a half of television where there's not a single episode that misses. And so Parks and Rec, because it was more on the ratings bubble kind of, and didn't really have that the legs that The Office did, kind of gets to end more on its own terms before it wore out its welcome, in a very kind of fitting way. But yeah, The Office, certainly another one that does its characters right by the finale, even if the journey there was a little weaker at times. That finale certainly does stand out as like, okay, they all end in a good place, or in the natural kind of place. At the same time, like, it's weird thinking back on it because like they definitely wanted to do that Dwight spinoff. And so even that in the final season, there's like that backdoor pilot episode for Dwight that introduces a whole bunch of new characters, that like I don't think we even see them at the wedding, because I think like this show had already been like kind of scrapped by that point or something. So it's like, oh yeah, it was weird that they devoted time and effort to that ends up going nowhere. But
I would
similar to the How I Met Your Father that never happened, I guess. Even though that didn't get like a backdoor kind of pilot within the final season of How I Met Your Mother. But
I also want to give a shout out to a show that is near and dear to both of our hearts that we haven't really talked really at all ever about in terms of its finale, which is The West Wing.
So I had that on my list.
Okay.
I added that.
Okay.
I added that while we were talking about The Office. I was like, given that we did a podcast about The West Wing for a season and a half, we should probably talk about the finale of The West Wing.
So the finale of The West Wing, I don't know what your thoughts are. I really have always really liked the finale of The West Wing.
Me too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They almost luck into elements of it because obviously
100%.
like that season starts with like the flash forward of the kind of the central crew coming back, and fortunately obviously we don't get John Spencer in that because of course he would tragically pass during the filming of that season, which drastically shifted the framework of the final episodes of that. And the showrunners have kind of gone on and said like, yeah, the original intent was maybe that Santos was going to lose, but losing Leo and then losing the election would have been just too much for that ensemble, as well as like the fans. So the fact that like it ends with that like a happy ending kind of for the future of the country there, is a beautiful. It's another beautiful send off to the characters. A lot of their characters, while they're going to be sticking around, a lot aren't And so it's it's nice to see CJ and Danny going off.
Yes,
it's nice to see Josh finally getting to step into that Leo role that he throughout the series got overlooked for after Leo's heart attack. When CJ comes in, everybody's like, well, CJ got the job that should have been Josh's job. Like from then on, there's like this, like, okay, Josh is never going to be that guy for Bartlett. So him going out and finding Santos and kind of getting to be that guy, at the end of the day.
Getting Sam back on it too.
Getting Sam back on, bringing Sam back in. Yeah. Even I don't remember if it's in the finale there. I guess it's probably not. It's probably in like the one of the lead up episodes. But like Sam saying like, I'm not going to come back unless you go take this vacation because you need this vacation.
Yeah, it's before. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Even the weird Aaron Sorkin cameo in the finale.
Oh yeah.
It's one of those things that like, given his like vocal distaste and refusal to accept anything beyond the season 4 finale when he left the show, like the fact that he came back to be quote unquote at the inauguration there is just like a weird thing, but
a nice thing. I think the Aaron Sorkin part of it too is interesting because like I don't, and he like kind of did like different responses at times, but like I ultimately don't think it's even as much as that like he like hates the later seasons. I think it's more of it's so hard for him to watch something that he put, I feel like, so much of his heart and soul into and then like be done by someone else. Like he's talked before about how like he tried to watch like the first episode of season 5, the first episode after he left, and got like through like the opening credits and was just like, I just can't do it. I had to just like turn it off kind of thing. Like, and so even that is like, I always viewed as like a nice moment of him come back and be like somewhat reconciled to being a part of like the end of this thing that he had kind of created. I love the like last scene of Bartlett and Abby in the plane, right? And what are you thinking of? And just tomorrow. Like, cause the West Wing is one of the more interesting shows in general, to be fair, but in terms of like its last season and its ending, like I feel like throughout the course of that season, there were like 18 different things that could have or would have or almost happened throughout the filming of it, and like obviously John Spencer's death impacted it, but like I mean there was most people of the cast talked about how the fact that like that wasn't even necessarily like guaranteed to be the last season, right? Like there was some who talked about like possibly doing like one more season after that to show like the first year of the Santos administration and show what it would be like out of the presidency for Bartlett and have him kind of be like this recurring character and focus on like building up the Santos one and like the full circle nature of that, because we pick up in the White House pretty much like right as their first year is coming to a close. So like it would have shown what the first year would have looked like, and there was a lot of talk of that. And then again, obviously John Spencer's death just changed so much of what that show's ending was that I think it just sucked the heart out of a lot of the people, right? Like, because I know Martin Sheen has talked before about how even when Aaron Sorkin left, he was very unsure about continuing. Like I feel like a lot of the cast had reservations at that point, and then they were able to kind of be like, all right, no, we can do this and figure it out. And then I think they were still kind of on board for like maybe one more after this, and then I think John Spencer was just like a thing too much, and it is that thing that it's kind of morbid to say, like that they did luck out in him not being in that scene. Luckily, they'd made him be the VP candidate, so that it was their way of being like, we can't have him here because we otherwise have to call him like either Mr. Vice President or something else, and so we'll just like not have him there. I think, I also love, we haven't touched on it, but like I love Charlie and his ending, both in terms of like where the show puts him at the end of the actual like series proper, and then also like the flash forward they have for Charlie. Like I just think it does so well by all of its characters. It is a mixture of fan servicey and like the flash forward it gives us at the beginning of the season, and then earned and how it takes everyone there. Like the only critique you can really have the last season is I think in terms of like big things is what they did with Toby's character, But even that isn't like a super big part of the finale. Like he gets to have his moment still. And in terms of where it takes Bartlett, who is, I think in many ways, like the heart of the West Wing, it is such a good ending for Jed Bartlett to have, I think, and such a deserved moment, and one that, especially in our current political climate, feels so good to have this figure who is such this kind of progressive liberal icon 20 plus years after the show first aired get this kind of respectful earned ending, I think, and one that you feel like Jed Bartlett has kind of always secretly wanted, right? Like I feel like Jed Bartlett wasn't necessarily someone who dreamed about being president every day. Like he was someone who certainly was very ambitious, but probably always thought that it was like just beyond him because of the circumstances of being a governor of New Hampshire. And then he kind of was able to catapult into that as like this like dark horse candidate to get the role. And so once he was president, I feel like he always kind of dreamed about being back home in New Hampshire and, you know, savoring the frigid winters that aren't actually that cold because I'm Jed Bartlett, and just getting to hang out with Abby and his 3 girls. And I just loved that. And I loved the Bartlett for America moment of that, which I think is one of the more heartfelt moments of any of these finales. Is kind of the recurring appearance of the Bartlett for America like napkin that Leo had given him, and then it finally gets brought back to Bartlett at the end, and it's a very fitting full circle nature.
Yeah, it's a great way of celebrating John Spencer despite his obvious absence in that episode. That like he kicked this whole thing off, and so we get to see that kind of make its way back.
I also will say, this is less of a finale, but more of just like the last part of the season. They didn't really have a choice, but I do think that The West Wing is one of my favorite shows, again, for a lot of ways, but also because of like how they incorporate real life death. Like obviously she didn't actually die, but like her deciding to leave the show and incorporating Catherine Dreesen's departure in the show led to what is probably the show's greatest episode in 2 Cathedrals. And then even in John Spencer and his actual death and right into the show, and the characters very much feeling that. Like it very much was a real thing, and like that lingered for episodes all the way to the end. And his actual like funeral service episode, I think, is very Sorkin-esque in how well I really think it handles grief and loss and the pain of it all. Like it does it very well. I think if Aaron Sorkin was to watch an episode, I would point him in that one because I think it does tap into a lot of themes that he really did so well there, and it is a beautiful send-off for John Spencer's character, I think.
Yeah, and like when I think of that episode, I even think of like all of the people that came back for that episode, despite having nothing in that episode. They are just like cameos. Seats in the pews. They're cameos. They don't have any lines or anything. They came back to honor John Spencer's life, basically. And you know that being captured on film is a beautiful moment in that as well.
And I think a testament to John Spencer too. Yeah.
Yeah. Agreed.
I'm sorry. Because I just thought of this. The last thing I wanted to say real quick for the West Wing as well, because it is for the Jerry of West Wing, which is Will Bailey. I like that even he gets a measure of kind of respect finally, and like the end to with his own like future-looking political career stuff, and he gets finally gets kind of some of the respect that he always kind of deserved, because Will Bailey's not a bad character, but he gets so much. He had to step into the shoes of Sam, but I've always really liked Will. Yeah.
On that, I kind of want to segue over, since we didn't really touch on him a lot, but like Alan Alda obviously being, an iconic character in that final season of West Wing. Let's segue over into MASH, which is, as you alluded to earlier, the actual highest rated finale of all time, with I want to say like 106 million people tuned in to watch the end of that series, and that's another one that's iconic. Obviously, like MASH predates even my time, but Like I would watch it growing up in like in reruns and stuff, and it was something that like my dad had loved so much. So like when we would watch it, he would kind of like point out, and we would like watch that finale episode and kind of or like share in the reverence of like how iconic and how beautiful the big goodbye is, effectively. And it's like it's certainly one I haven't watched in a while, but like going back and kind of preparing for this conversation, I kind of read the recap of that episode, and just like all the other tragic things that happen in that finale. Like you forget that show is a comedy, by its nature, or its original intent. But the kind of the recap I was looking at very much talks about how this finale was fitting in like the darker tone that the show took in its later years.
That's what I was going to say.
Because in that, like, you have basically Hawkeye's, Alan Alda's character, like, fighting off a mental breakdown because of this horrible thing he has seen of this mother smuggling her child to keep the child from crying out, and, like, giving away, their like, this busload of refugees in enemy territory or something like that, and he's just like devastated by that. And you have like the priest character goes deaf from mortar fire, and like just everybody's dealing with like immense crap as the war is ending, as everybody's leaving, and the final like iconic shot of goodbye spelled out in rocks to send Hawkeye off, like suddenly makes him feel less alone, I guess, and kind of like helps bring him back from the brink. And yeah, it's certainly like one of the most iconic ones, even if I don't have like a super deep personal connection to it. It's certainly one that we couldn't kind of like gloss over or not mention, I guess.
I think for me, so I'm someone who, again, my dad loves MASH, but I'm someone who genuinely loves MASH. Like I think it's one of the greatest shows ever made. I think like it's incredible, and the finale very much is fitting in the darker tone of the kind of the second half of the show. Like MASH is an interesting one too, because as the show progressed, Alan Alda took on more of a kind of producer role and director and writer, and he became like one of the main showrunners by the end of the show. And he helped steer it in that kind of darker, more realistic, I think, depiction of war. And the finale, we should also clarify, is epic. It is a 2-hour it's a movie. It is a 2-hour long event, basically. And it is beautiful. It is sad. It is tragic. It is one of those finales that is both, I don't know how they thought of it, and also simultaneously the only way it seems like they possibly could have ended the show. Obviously like the Hawkeye and BJ finale, like goodbye at the end, is among the most like iconic images in television history, I would argue. It is so poignant. It's so beautiful. It is such a great mixture of these characters for 11 seasons, 3 years, and like the chronological timeline technically, but for so long have just like wanted to all leave. Like they all want to leave. Nobody wants to be in Korea. And then when finally like the war finally ends and they're ready to go, no one is that particularly eager to go either, though. Because they've kind of developed such intense relationships. It is just, I think it is very much still, even to today, the standard by which a lot of finales are judged and graded on. It is incredible. It drew, in the U.S., 106 million viewers, over 121 total, and from when it aired in 1983 all the way until 2010, it was the most watched thing in TV history in America. And then finally, Super Bowl finally passed it in 2010. Even now, it is the most watched finale of all time. Still, obviously, the most watched episode of TV ever. Like still has higher ratings and like a share of the TV audience than the Super Bowls do. I mean, it is just such an iconic piece of television, and I think such a powerful piece. Like it is. I feel like it's rare for, certainly for a comedy, because that's like the weird thing. Like MASH very much is like one of the shows that like kind of invented the dramedy. But I mean, it is super somber and dark and not particularly uplifting for a lot of that show. And it does it so well. It feels like all of the characters are kind of giving their all to give these characters they'd played for so long a fitting goodbye and a fitting farewell, and I think it absolutely comes across on screen. Like it is a great finale.
Yeah, absolutely iconic.
Yeah.
Do you have another one you want to add to the list?
Yes. So it is no MASH in terms of its dramatic nature, but still, I think a sitcom that very much also flirts with that dramedy line, which we've already kind of referenced it, which is Scrubs. And Scrubs proper, because technically the last season is also called Scrubs MD, so I'm going to get away with it. It's like a little cheat. I mean, Scrubs finale, like Scrubs proper finale with Zach Braff, I think actually is like perfect. If you ask me what I think the best finale of all time is, I would have a toss up between like Scrubs, MASH is in there for sure, and then like one other, but Scrubs is unquestionably and has in the mix and has been in their mix for going on 11 years now. It is, and it's almost, in a lot of ways very similar to MASH. It is such a perfect farewell for so many of the characters. Like it all just clicked so well. I think the like final part of like Zach Braff walking down the hallway and like all of the characters and guest stars from like prior seasons, living or dead, and then like looking at like what could happen in the future with like the Book of Love playing over. I literally like it gets me every single time. Like I literally can't watch it without crying. I think it's just so beautiful. I love the like his kind of voiceover of like, you know, why can't it happen just this once, like his dream. I love even the fact that it's like it's in essence telling you like this is what his future is going to be, but also still not like saying 100% that's what it's going to be. And I like even like kind of some of the ambiguity in that. I think his final scene with Dr. Cox is great. And with Carla, I think Turk repeatedly throughout the episode trying to have him have like the best goodbye possible, but like that not being possible. Really, you can't give someone a great goodbye. It just has to kind of happen or not. And like their final exchanges are super good and beautiful. And then yeah, it is for me like the Scrubs finale is and forever will be just that last like 5 minutes, like him going in the hallway and seeing like Brendan Fraser's character there, and like also again, that's how you do a like cameo filled like fan servicey final episode. It's not like how Seinfeld tried to do it, but it's like that where it's just like they can just be there and they don't even have to like necessarily say anything. It's I mean they even had like what is it like Gift Shop Girl was in there, and it's like it's just all of the like tiny characters, big and small, and Hooch being in the straight jacket, and like they just had such a great mixture of even at the very end of threading this line that I feel like Scrubs did so well of dramedy or dramatic and comedic natures, right? And Scrubs very much was, I think, clearly inspired by MASH in a lot of ways. But that finale is one too where like they just got all the notes right in terms of sending off Zach Braff. And yeah, his finale, his farewell, and even him just like walking by himself to like his car as like the theme music plays, and it's such a good end for his character and then for all the characters involved. And Scrubs MD is what it is, bad, but like
yeah, like med school, I think is what it actually is.
Yeah, med school. And like but like in that moment, like sitting there when it aired, like I was just like floored at how much they had earned the tears rolling down my face. Like they had just like nailed it. They nailed Zach Braff and like that exit, because like technically like it was very much like it was very clearly the last episode of the show, but like it was technically just Zach Braff's farewell and Carla's as well. But like it was very clearly also the last episode, and like they just nailed it on how I would have wanted his story to end. And yeah, Scrubs' finale is still in my eyes like one of the benchmarks I use to kind of grade good or bad finales.
Yeah, that's one I'd have to like go back and like research the actual timeline of things, but I imagine based on like that episode and the timing of it, because the next season was like the show got picked up and moved to a different network.
Yeah.
And it was like one of the first examples of that I remember kind of making headlines and happening. It has since happened with stuff like Brooklyn Nine-Nine as well, to I think much better effect. But like I feel like it was very much like when it was shot, it was the send-off. It was like the last time we were going to see these characters. I feel like it didn't get picked up until after that finale got shot. But I may be wrong on the timeline
it didn't.
of that.
No, you're not. And it's really interesting too. Like, so like actually like the like behind the scenes stuff was actually kind of like fascinating in its own right for Scrubs, because it had a few. It was a little bit like I think for sure for you was like Chuck, where like it had a few close calls, because it had actually changed networks already before that, already once before, and then it happened again with Med School, but like because it had originally been on NBC, and then like the last 2 seasons I think were on ABC, and then the medical school one I think was on CBS, but it was one where Bill Lawrence, who is the creator of Scrubs and also Cougar Town, which is on my list. Cougar Town's fine. That's the mention of Cougar Town. Like he talked before about how like he campaigned and fought so hard to have medical schools named just medical school, to not have Scrubs on there at all. Like he fought so hard, and like they just wouldn't give it to him. Basically, like they were like, "This is going to be the next season of Scrubs. It's going to be called," and like it was such. He like talked about how like it was such a big back and forth, and like how it sucked so much like out of him even in doing the last season. Like he just couldn't. He's like, but this isn't. It's just different. It's so different. And like the behind the scenes stuff from that is kind of interesting in its own right.
Yeah, just I looked it up.
Thank you.
So so the thing was, the show had always been produced by ABC, but it was distributed by NBC for the first 7 seasons, and then the last 2 seasons were ABC. So it had already, like, that last season had moved the show. The show moved from NBC to ABC in this last season that we're talking about. And then ABC kind of made the call very last minute to say, yeah, it's good enough. Let's go ahead and keep it on for another season. Let's test out this new format that we're gonna play with on it for that Med School season 9. So that was kind of the history was, and I remember like seeing that at the time of like, oh, it's weird. So it was kind of technically always an ABC show, but it aired on NBC. And again, Brooklyn Nine-Nine was a very similar thing, where it was like Brooklyn Nine-Nine was a Fox distributed thing, I think, but it aired on NBC, or vice versa, and then switched when it was saved by the kind of other network. The fact that it had already switched networks and probably lost some of its audience in that final season that we're talking about, because of that shift. Like, people didn't know that it had moved to ABC. Like, maybe that was kind of the part of the like behind the scenes, like, well, now that the word is out there that the show's on ABC, maybe we'll find a new audience with this new cast of characters and this new premise for the show. And obviously that did not happen. So yeah, I like, and it was always, even at the time, it was jokingly going to be called Scrubs the New Class. Pulling from the Saved by the Bell, the New Class, one of the most iconic spin-offs of a series, I guess. But yeah, it's fascinating because, like, talking about Scrubs, like, Scrubs is one of those shows, like, I have every season on my DVD shelf right behind me.
Hell yeah, you do.
It's one of those first shows I remember, like, buying for myself kind of thing, because I loved it so much, and I've watched it start to finish so many times, especially during like my college years and stuff, and and I don't know if I've gone back and like revisited it in like the streaming era where like, I'm much less inclined to go grab my DVDs and throw them in my PlayStation or something like that, and I will much sooner just like, let's look and see what's on Netflix or something like that. So I probably haven't watched it in the last 6 or 7 years at least, maybe even 10 plus years. And it's definitely one that, like, you talking about it makes me really want to go back and rewatch that finale, because like I have, a very blurred memory of like the finale that is probably in some ways, dampened a little bit by knowing what came after, and having like that final season, the real final season, being like more burned in my brain because it wasn't like the real send-off. One of the things you did touch on that I absolutely want to give Scrubs love on is its music. Mm-hmm. Its use of music is probably the best in any show ever.
Yes, 100%.
To the point that my sister for Christmas one year, I think, found like I don't know how she did it, but she basically gave me like a whole bunch of CDs that was just like every song ever used in Scrubs. Like she just ripped and burned. I'm pretty sure like she found it somewhere online, and somebody had basically like done that compilation, pulled that together, and so yeah, like just like that introduced me to Joshua Radin, mm-hmm. And I love like his music and some of the songs, iconic in there, like Winter
made me fall in love with Journey.
One. Yeah, you got that. Colin Hayes has a lot of great stuff in there.
Yep.
From Men at Work. Yeah, like so like I know, and I've never been like a music guy. Like it's just never been like my thing. I don't go out and listen to like. One of the trends on Twitter these last couple of days has been like post your on repeat stuff, and I'm like, I don't use Spotify enough to even know how to do that or how to get that information. So like it's just but the Scrubs use of music in like help make so many of its iconic moments. And I loved it so much. Absolute shout out to Scrubs.
Scrubs is one for me where like, especially as as creators, I guess, in some capacity, like Scrubs is one of the most influential and like impactful show in terms of like how I view like both like writing and like creation and like kind of like production, like brainstorming side of things, like. In terms of like whenever I imagine like, oh, if I were to make a TV show, this is what it would look like. Scrubs is one that just has like the biggest impact. And like, to be fair, part of that is like I was the perfect age. Like I was like growing up with Scrubs basically. But part of it is just like, I think Scrubs, full disclosure is like, it is in my top 3 or 4 favorite shows of all time. So I like genuinely love Scrubs. But like its usage of music in particular has been so impactful in how I view storytelling and music together, right? Whether it is shows or movies or video games, or theater even, like the usage of music and the thing that you're watching is so entwined for me now and is so crucial because of, I think, Scrubs' impact in particular. And whenever I listen, like I just have like music that I'm like, that's a good finale episode, or that's a good season premiere episode, that's a good like, and just like as like that music ties into that so well. And like it is so embedded music as a crucial like storytelling instrument for me. And the last season of Scrubs in general, it's like the weird irony of it probably was one of its least viewed seasons, but like the last season of Scrubs as a whole, and again it was a bit shorter one, but it's I will for all of my life stand by that. Like the last season of Scrubs is like one of the best seasons. Like if it's not quite in like the golden age run of like seasons like 1 through 4, probably it is right after that. Like the last season of Scrubs is so good. Again, this isn't necessarily technically what the episode's about, but like the best last seasons of shows I have always stood by are the seasons where they know it's going to be the end, because they have a very clear driving point, which is why like I think the last season of The Office is better than the season before it, also because Jim Spader's not in it. It's why I think the last season of Scrubs is so great. It's why I think the last season of Parks and Rec is so good. The last season of Monk, which is another show I'm about to get to, like when they have a clear destination they're driving to, I think it just makes those seasons better, right? And Scrubs absolutely does it in its season, and it, I think, nails the landing in terms of what they were trying to kind of get to. And yeah, it's even like outside of Scrubs, like I can't even listen to some of the, like the music on that show without like getting like emotional. Think back now, like forever. How to Save a Life is tied into Scrubs, and like that iconic episode.
Yeah, it's I love you mentioning like if you created a TV show, this is like the template you would use, because I'm pretty sure I've mentioned to you, I don't remember if it's been on one of our podcasts, but I've mentioned to you this pitch I had from my days working at Sam's Club years and years ago. That was basically the pitch was a show called Cart Crew, feature like it focused on like the people that push the shopping carts.
It's such a good idea,
and it was very much like the vision in my head was Scrubs meets The Office, but with that as your cast of characters, the people pushing carts, and then you can kind of like expand into, so it ends up also being like pseudo Parks and Rec, because you can expand into every department within the big box store. Like one of the characters was, you know, the senile old man, like the almost Creed Bratton-esque character, but a little bit more like a little bit more of a mainstay kind of character. So it'd probably be more like a Creed meets Kelso, I guess, in that like he's a you know, curmudgeonly guy who is the door greeter, but he occasionally like he's the guy that imparts, you know, the wisdom of every episode or something like that. Like that would be kind of that character alongside this, you know, group of, you know, 18 to 20 somethings that are out there pushing carts every day. And then eventually over the course of the series, you have this guy, the main character, kind of work his way up into, you know, working as a cashier or, you know, elsewhere within the store, kind of like stepping into, much like I did in my own Sam's Club career, stepping into other departments when like somebody was short staffed. Like that was, I worked in the bakery, for a time in there. And I guess that was Costco eventually down the line, but like I worked in both of those places, so like that was always like I had, you know, a show Bible with like the characters and who these people were, and even like had my own J.D. Elliott kind of like romance within the series, like booked out and planned out. So yeah, Scrubs was also very influential on like the ideas I had as a young creative thinker.
Yeah. Scrubs is just great. It's also just a great. I mean, yeah, it's a great show. It is always how I view like how to end a show, and yeah, it's whether it's How to Save a Life, Book of Love, anything, like it's incorporation of music is so good. The last show
you mentioned Monk, so I want to throw it over to you for Monk.
That's the last one that I really want to get into. And it was a rough like 3 months of my life. Monk and Scrubs ended basically like so close to each other. I think there was like a 3 or 4 months difference in between the two finales, and it was also the year I was graduated in high school, so it was an emotional 5 months for me in that time period. Yeah, Scrubs went down, or I think Monk went first, then Scrubs, and then I graduated, something in that time span. Monk's finale is so good, and Monk also again knew it was gonna be the last season, and Monk was one of the first shows that, like I saw like make it like a big deal, like broadcast, like the final season getting ready to premiere, like go watch, and I was like, oh shit, yeah, like because I loved Monk. And I still am a massive Monk fan. Another expert dramedy. And its last episode is a 2-parter, and it's so good. Monk is a weird one, too, because its 2 parts are very tonally different. And I think they each succeed in kind of nailing their tone they're going for. Like, the first part of the Monk finale is so dark. Like, it's so dark. And every now and again, I'm like, I almost wish they'd committed to it. Because, like, this whole episode is spoilers. But, like, the first episode of Monk, basically, of that, like, 2-parter, basically ends with Monk dying. Like, he's, like, been poisoned somehow, and, like, he's going to die. And every now and again, I'm like, man, I really do think it'd have been such a cool ending if they had, like, had him catch the bad guy, obviously, but then, like, also him just, like, die. Like, it's so fucking dark. Like, the last episode, like, that first part of, like, Monk, like, everything goes bad. Everything's just, like, it's, like, they committed, like, we're gonna make this dark. And the second part is, like, way, like, they, like, fix things, and obviously it gets better. And then, like, the way that they, like, finally allow Adrian to have a family is, like, so, like, it's so beautiful. Like, him getting this daughter he never kind of knew he had. from like Trudy's long estranged child that she didn't even know she had necessarily, like, well, I guess she had known she had, but like didn't know was still alive.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful. Like, and like that's one for me of a little bit like the mother from How I Met Your Mother, but even more compressed. Like, she's just in like 1.5 episodes. This is a character who there was, I mean, like, Trudy is almost quite literally like a mythologized figure within the series of Monk. And so to kind of have this person who is like her daughter come in and just be awesome, like just click so well, have such good chemistry with Tony Shalhoub, and just like fill your heart with so much joy. Like it feels like such an incredible task, and the actress who played her nailed it so effortlessly and flawlessly. And it is one of those endings where it's like I never in a million years would have imagined what we got as a final, like the finale of Monk as the finale of Monk, but getting it was so good, and it was so deserved, and it was so earned. And all of the cast of characters finales, whether it's Captain Sotomayor or anyone else, like they all just got kind of the ending that they needed to get, and that felt right for them. But Monk and his daughter basically just doing anything together is the best. And like just like the last like 5 or so minutes of that, as of course Randy Newman just like serenades you with a song as like the last like 5 minutes happen, are like incredible. And like I dare someone who's seen every episode of that show and get to that last 5 minutes and not cry, then you're made of stone. It is so beautiful, and it is that thing of, unlike Scrubs, Adrian Monk is such a damaged character. Like, he's so broken. And so it just makes it that much more, it's gonna make me do it now. No. It just makes it so much more fulfilling and rewarding, and like joyous to see him be healed in the ways that he's healed, I think, in that episode, and finally get closure on Trudy, and her death, and also find a way to keep her memory alive and keep her spirit alive in her daughter, and just, I think, finally find a new avenue for, I think, this love that has kind of been extinguished in him for so long, I think. And it's super beautiful. Also, Natalie gets a great ending too. Like the way that her family is kind of incorporated with Monks at the end. It is such a good finale, and it's so earned for all those characters, and it's just what I couldn't in my wildest dreams have like imagined. And then the fact that we got that, it's so great.
It's fascinating because like Monk and Psych both kind of live in my head as like staples of more so my time in college, because that's like I was in college for most of the run of those shows, and like and pretty much anything like USA and TNT, and so like throwing into this like Burn Notice or something like that. Mm-hmm. Like I've watched every episode of those shows, but I don't like they were background noise to the rest of my life, I guess, of what was going on in my life during those times. So like I have like these vague like glimpses as you're kind of talking about this Monk finale of like, oh yeah, I guess I remember that, and I go in and like look at IMDb and see like, that's right, who played Trudy? Oh, Trudy was played by Jan from The Office, Melora Hardin, and it's just like, oh yeah, I vaguely remember that, and but like I don't have this deep like reverence for it that you're kind of speaking with, and it's just this like it's weird to like realize, like that, where it's like I loved Monk. I made a point to go out of my way to watch Monk, and Psych, and Psych like more so like I have not watched any of like the like We're Back movies that they've done, just because I just it's one of those things where it's like I like it's such a weird like, oh, like that chapter of my life feels closed, and so like I didn't need to go back to those characters. I didn't need to like experience any more of their story or anything like that. So I haven't. and Monk is another one of those things, which is like I loved my time with Monk, and I love that it got to kind of go out on its own terms, as you kind of mentioned. And it's just like it's weird that like some of this kind of goes into, we talked a little bit about we're at some point going to sit down and record our Disney Plus episode about our D Plus episode about Halloween Town, because I kind of have been going into that with this like, I don't think I ever watched Halloween Town, and then I sit down and watch it, I'm like, oh no, I definitely watched this, I definitely like have memories of this, but like I've probably just seen so much television over my life that like there are definitely things I don't remember at all having watched. I've watched them, but they've just gone in and out, or life has just pushed out that information in favor of other memories. And so Monk is one of those things where like I remember like broad strokes what Monk is and what and Monk, but even like as you started talking about it, in my head, the first thing that came to mind was his first assistant, whose name even escapes me. And it wasn't until I pulled up, Sharona. It wasn't until I pulled up IMDb that I saw Natalie on there. And I was like, oh, that's right. Like that Sharona like left the show at some point, and Natalie kind of took over, and that being a big thing on the show and a big thing for Monk as a character, having to kind of like come to terms with that. And even like the side characters on that show, like Stottlemyre, as soon as I see that, I'm like, oh, that's right, he was on that one. And then you have like the Timothy Oliphant, no, right? No, Timothy whoever Amundsen or something, whoever like Lassiter is on Psych. Like even those are like sometimes interchanged in my mind and stuff like that. Who was the authority figure? Like because so many of those shows kind of felt like a template, and they had like their own little mold that they kind of did, and so like that like show of the week thing that those shows did, while also having their overarching plots. It's fascinating to like think back on that, and love that you have this like honor and reverence for this show that is largely like, oh, that's right, that's obviously the show that shot Tony Shalhoub through the stratosphere in terms of like recognition, and he did critical great work on the show. But
I think either 3 or 4 Emmys for his work as well on it.
Yeah. But yeah, it's one of those things where I'm just like, oh yeah, I guess like it's weird to think of how shows were at one point in time, such a staple or such a part of my life that I haven't thought about in years. And Monk and I guess like just again like pretty much everything in that like USA and TNT slate of that era just kind of like falls in. But shout out to Monk, and I'm glad the finale resonated with you as much as it did.
And I think it's also that thing of the stories hitting you at the perfect time in your life, right? Because I very much feel like I grew up with Scrubs and Monk and Psych were kind of the big shows for me of like the like 2000 to 2014 range, because Psych went on longer than the other ones did. And like I grew up on these, right? Like I always talk about the fact that Psych was the first ever show that I was literally there for the entire time. I was there from the very first episode to the very last episode. Like I caught the entire, like I didn't come in late like I did for Scrubs or Monk. I was there from the very beginning. And even Scrubs and Monk, I was there for most of it. And like they were just these shows that I was like the perfect, like I was coming of age. Like I kind of talked about like Scrubs and Monk ended the year that I graduated from high school. And then, so it was such a perfect time to kind of wrap up that chapter in my life. It's the same reason why like I have a soft spot in my heart for, I'm gonna forget the name of it now. The Don't Nod, Choose Your Own Adventure game, Life is Strange season 1, because I played Life is Strange season 1 basically the week before I graduated from college. I played that all in like one sitting basically, and so like that has a very special place in my heart for the same reason, right? And I think these things just kind of come at the perfect time. And I'm someone who, my whole family are massive Psychos, or like Psych fans, and like we're huge. Like I love Psych. Like it is, I'm like a diehard fan of Psych. I haven't gone back and watched the movies yet either. I want to, just haven't gotten to it yet, because it does feel like, and I don't even think Psych's finale is that particularly great. I think it's very much on the like this is fine. It's a fine finale. It's like its finale. Weird enough, it might be like the weaker episode in that last season, which is pretty fun and cool. Um, but it does feel like it had a good moment of being like, all right, cool. Like that chapter is kind of closed, and like I love that chapter, but like, you know, it's also like I'm okay with it ending in the same vein, and those are such like pillars of my like kind of transition from like a child to like an adult of those kind of three shows. And so I think that also is why I love all the three shows so much. Also, they're just like fantastic sitcoms. But B, why for two of the three, I love their finales as well.
Great. So you said Monk was pretty much your last show. I have like 7 or 8 more, so I won't go through all of them, but I just want to give them all some shout outs and some love. Futurama was the next one on my list. Futurama is one of my favorite shows of all time. I very much loved it. At the time, that is a show I have watched every episode, especially of like the original run. Every episode multiple times, every episode with commentary multiple times, because I loved the brains behind that show, and the original finale of that show wasn't intended to be the finale, but it ends up being a beautiful like fitting send off where it's very much like a what is it, the Magi, the Gift of the Magi kind of story, where the Gift of the Magi meets like a deal with the devil kind of thing. Fry makes a deal with the robot devil to get the robot devil's hands, so that he can play the holophoner beautifully, and show Leela just how much she means to him, and he creates this beautiful opera. But in the in the course of the episode, Leela, in order to get something, basically gives away like something of hers, and ends up like with robot ears and whatever, and basically gets deafened, and so she can't like appreciate this beautiful thing that Fry has done for her. Everything gets like switched back around, and Fry is a terrible holophoner player, but still like conveys the message, and you get this like send off that like Fry and Leela are going to be happy together, at some point. The show ended, went into like syndication, DVD sales, and like Comedy Central stuff. Made the show do well enough that like Comedy Central brought the show back for like 4 like direct to DVD movies that served as basically a 5th season. So it got like a second finale there, and then those did well enough that they ended up bringing it back for another season or 2 as like a kind of real final send off. And the final send off, spoilers for Futurama, there is like this beautiful thing where like they create a time machine, but it only goes forward in time, and through hijinks and mayhem and confusion, like I want to say like Fry gets sent into the future or something. Like it's weird because it is like, I don't know this one as well as I know the other one, but it like the end of it is okay. It can only go forward in time, but time is a circle, and so eventually time resets. And basically, the whole moral of the final episode is Fry and Leela are going to get to do this forever. They're going to get to go through their whole love story over and over and over again for all of time. And it's a very beautiful kind of another beautiful send off for these characters that leans into the sci-fi weirdness of all of it. So like that's a show that I love because they got effectively 3 finales, all of which were fun and fitting and loving to the characters. Chuck is another one that obviously does the same kind of thing that I've mentioned many times before. But Chuck, as a show that was like always on the bubble, wrote like season finales or mid-season finales that could have served as the series finales. And so you get all these beautiful send-offs for its characters time and time again over that series, only for the series to be magically picked up and saved at the last minute. And unfortunately, like the actual series finale ends up being one of their weaker ones, where they knew this is how we have 13 episodes or whatever to end the season, to end the show, so this is the story arc we're going to tell. It ends up like completely undoing a lot of the work because Sarah, the love interest, basically loses her memory, and she loses, the 5 years that she spent with Chuck, where they, their friendship and then romance and love blossomed, to the point that's all taken away from her. And it's very much like incredibly implied that like her memory starts coming back in like the final moments and everything, and they will get all that stuff back. But like just the whole like that whole arc left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. But it had so many other great finales throughout. On the bad side of things, I guess I have to say Game of Thrones, even though I don't hate Game of Thrones as much as everybody else. I think Game of Thrones was never going to win people over but it's also like probably the best you're ever going to get because it's increasingly unlikely that George R.R. Martin's ever going to finish those books.
No, he's not. I'll spoil alert for you right now.
and there is a degree of that show finale that like I'm sure like it still had George R.R. Martin like involved in the show. Mm-hmm. So like it's not completely bereft of the ideas that he gave them for the final, end of the show. If anything, he's more likely to try and change now based on like the, vehement backlash of the finale, that the books, would change because of that. That like I imagine it's largely what he originally planned, or at least especially for like some of the big moments. Yeah. But like it's one that like I appreciate, or like I respect that people hate it. I didn't hate it as much, but yeah. I want to give love. It's a weird one because it's really only one season, but Watchmen on HBO was incredible, and I would honestly I would love it if that wasn't the series finale. I would love to see it come back, especially following like the Black Lives Matter movement of 2020, and see kind of what the future of the Watchmen series would hold. But like it's just like a perfect self-contained season of television, the one season that we've gotten of Watchmen. So shout out to that. Are you a Sopranos fan, Logan? Remind me.
I love The Sopranos.
So do you want to talk about the Sopranos season finale? Because it's one that obviously comes up in this conversation. I can't speak to it because I've never watched an episode of The Sopranos, but I remember at the time hearing about it and being like, "Oh, that's a weird way to end a show."
So the first thing I'll say about the Sopranos finale is that too much time and way too much writing has been spent on the Sopranos finale, in the last 5 minutes in particular.
The cut to black.
Yeah, people I think don't like ambiguity, and like I have someone who's written an article in the past about how like how I don't like ambiguity in games in terms of how a lot of games do it, I think, poorly. Who am I to, throw a stone at glass houses? But I think The Sopranos, so what I'll say about The Sopranos finale is it strikes me a little bit as Game of Thrones-esque in the vein of like, I don't know how you wanted this show to end, but no matter how it ended, people are going to be upset. I mean, if the options are either Tony lives or Tony dies, half of the people are going to want one, half of the people are going to want the other one, then like, half the audience is going to be upset they didn't get what they wanted. And so in that vein, basically making it a how do you see it kind of ending is sort of genius. You can kind of read into it what you want. And I think there's almost been some like critical revisionism around the Sopranos finale. Like I feel like people now are like, yeah, it's always been great, and it's like at the time, I remember like watching sports shows on like ESPN and SportsCenter that were talking about the finale of Sopranos, and like just like it was. I feel like it set off like a firestorm in 2007. The bigger thing for me, The Sopranos is almost the reverse. I don't know. It's the opposite of a show that had a great last season and then ended poorly. Like The Sopranos finale itself is like actually good, I think. It's the last season is one that I've always had issues with, where it's just for no discernible reason other than because HBO wanted to, almost certainly. Every season of Sopranos is 13 episodes or 12 episodes, And then the last season 6 is like 34. It's some like fucking ridiculous number. It's like 30 something episodes because they split it in half. They did that thing, and like I think they're like 13 episodes maybe in the first half. It's like a regular thing, and the other one has like 22 or something. And so it's essentially 2 seasons, but they just don't call it that. And so because of that, if you view it as just like one season, the last season is insane. I mean, and like also because of like what happens at the end of season 5, which I won't spoil, I guess, but like so much of that first half of the season, or I think it might be opposite. I think maybe the first half of season 6 is like the longer one, then the second half is the shorter one. And like it takes so much time to get the ball running, and the first half of season 6, and the second half is like once it gets into the end game, it goes quicker and it gets good. But like it is so slow out of the gates, and it stumbles so much, and it loses so much momentum. And like I think there was and like The Sopranos is a weird show, and I love The Sopranos. It's a weird show though because like the first 3 seasons, I think they did basically back to back to back. So they were like regular. It was like, regular shows were happening kind of thing. Like it came out in like 98, 99, 2000, I think, or like 99, 2000, 2001, or whatever it was, like something like that. Like basically, a season every year. And then they began to get weird and they had like an extra year, like an extra like 18 months between like the next season, and then like another 18 months into like the next season, and then like between season 5 and 6 premiere, I think was like 2 years, and then there was another year between like season 6.1 and season 6.2, and like it just became this weird thing of like, what the hell are we like? What is this? Like, it began to have like these bigger gaps, and like for me, like even though I didn't watch it as it aired, I feel like I can feel those gaps watching the show now. Like because like the kids, for example, are like, well, they're significantly older. And it feels like there's some momentum kind of being removed. So for me, actually, like, I think the last episode is good. My issue with Soprano usually lie more with like, I think the last season is not as good. And it kind of really, I think, took some of the wind out of the sails of Sopranos, which is a shame because that show, when it's good, is some of the best TV, period. But the last episode is fine. Like, it's sort of thing like, I don't know, nobody's gonna be happy with if Tony Soprano lives or dies. And I've kind of always been of the opinion, like, I think it's, at the very least, I think it's clever, but like, if somebody wrote an argument of like, I would not be that unconvinced. Like, it's kind of genius to be like, you know what? If people won't be like happy with one or the other, I'm just gonna kind of be like, cut to black before it happens, and you have to kind of just figure it out on yourself. And I kind of love the idea of that, and just Tony doesn't get any closure in the show, and we the audience aren't given any closure, right? And the whole point of like David Simmons, I believe, is that like he very much is like indicting the audience is like being
David Chase.
Thank you. I always get him, the guy from
David Simon is the guy who writes The Wire.
Yeah, I always get them two mixed up.
Yeah,
and he very much was like indicting the audience for like being culpable with like Tony's crimes and like the show's crimes, and so like I've always found it fitting at the very least that Tony doesn't get any closure and we don't get any closure, and he to the very end he's kind of condemning us for everything that we've kind of partaken in and vicariously enjoyed.
Yeah. I looked it up because you were like 36, like it had like 36 episodes where I was like the final season 21 episodes. But yes, it did.
It's so long.
Like it did span out. Like season 6 started in March of 2006 and didn't end until June of 2007. So yeah, even that like split in between seasons was.
And there was I think it was a 2-year gap between season 5 and 6.
Yeah. Yeah, season 4 was like 2002, season 5 was 2004, season 6 was 2006.
Which is like such a weird pacing,
yeah. So a couple final ones from me. Breaking Bad, I think, in kind of that a like not a similar vein to Sopranos, but like I feel like Breaking Bad kind of came out of like cable TV wanting to make their own Sopranos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%.
And Vince Gilligan like handled that show masterfully, start to finish. I thought. I don't think there's like a wasted episode in there. There are people that will argue with that, but I rewatched it going into the El Camino movie that came out last year, and like just love that series. I love, it gives you the ending that like the audience needs for the catharsis of like Walt. It doesn't play it ambiguous. Like Walt dies, it, like you see it happen, and the people who were like impacted by his life are freed from Walt. And it's beautiful and just expertly handled. So, shout out to Breaking Bad.
I've heard some people say, because again, I've never made it past like the first few episodes of season 1, but I've heard a lot of people talk about how the actual like best episode of the show / like perfect finale was like, I think it's 2 episodes before the finale.
Ozymandias is so it is notably directed by Rian Johnson of The Last Jedi fame, or infamy, and Ozymandias is basically the climax of the series, and the last couple episodes that come afterwards are the denouement, and play around, like they even do their own little like time jump. It's not like a 3-year time jump, but they deal with the aftermath of what happens in Ozymandias, but it doesn't happen like immediately after what happens in Ozymandias. So yeah, there is kind of like a prolonged like finale there over the next couple episodes. But yeah, Ozymandias is where like the big confrontations that like the whole show has been building to happen in Ozymandias, and it's like it is one of the finest, in my opinion, one of the finest episodes of television, period, because of how it's pacing and all of the payoff and all of the build up to that moment, to those moments, and it's tense in all the right ways. It plays with expectations and subverts expectations, as Rian Johnson often does, in all the right ways, and is just it's certainly the best episode of Breaking Bad, I think. But the finale of Breaking Bad, as kind of the fallout of that episode, is also superb in its own right. So yes, you have heard correctly. Newhart is one that we talked about, that is probably one of the most iconic of all time series finales, in that like they turn it into a joke of the Newhart, basically the ending of Newhart being like, oh, it was all a dream, and we go back to the Bob Newhart show from years and years earlier, and he wakes up in bed with his wife from that show. Smart. And just being like, I had this weird dream where I was running like an inn in the Appalachian Mountains or whatever. Like, it's just such a great like payoff to effectively 2 shows there, and just like I don't know if anything will ever like top it in terms of like how iconic that idea of it was all a dream is. Like Dallas has even done that, and obviously like the Who Shot JR season kind of ends up being like dreamed away or whatever, but yeah, so it's such a great ending for Newhart that again like well predates my time as well as yours, but like it's one of those that stands the test of time all these years later.
And our parents both have, I'm sure, talked about it. Yeah, and
our parents, like I mean, like Newhart and the Bob Newhart show were on Nick at Night when I was growing up, so I watched those shows, even if I wasn't watching them in the right order or whatever. I was watching them in syndication, and so like I have an appreciation for the completely different like setting and style of both of those shows, so that when you end this one with these like oddball woodsman characters or whatever, when you end that with like him going back to his psychiatrist life, and it was all a dream kind of thing, is just a fun little send off to that show.
Part of what makes Newhart so cool too, I'll add on, is just you have to have it's like they did that you would have 2 smash sitcoms that each last like years and years and years, so you can do that final payoff. Is like, because the idea of like the whole show is a dream is in itself such a like radical idea to try to like commit to make a land, because people can be furious about it. And then they did that like it works, and not just does it work, but like you can tie it into your first show. Like again, like you have to be someone. It would be like if the ending of Veep, like she woke up and she was Elaine Bennis in bed with like Jerry or something. It would just be like I can't even think of like that many parallels people who've had multiple smash successful sitcoms. Like it's just like it's such a long con in that aspect too. Of like it's so hard to do because you need 2 successful shows.
Yeah, the immediate one I thought of, which is a bit of a cheat, would have been Frasier waking up at the bar in Cheers from like a blackout drunk night, being like, I just had this vivid dream of me moving to Seattle and becoming a radio talk show therapist. Yeah. And you wind up and Sam's there behind the bar or something all these years later. But even that's a cheat because it's still the same character, so to speak. But yeah. It's like he had a great run as an ensemble person in Cheers, and then another 10-year run as Frasier Crane on his own show, spearheading his own show. So yeah, like Kelsey Grammer there, like having a 20-year career spanning 2 of like the most beloved sitcoms of that era. Is another one in that ilk. But yeah, like the fact that it was Newhart doing 2 completely different like ideas and 2 different sitcoms doing that. Yeah, it's
Ted Danson's character in The Good Place wakes up at the bar and Cheers.
yeah, there you go. Yeah. And then the last one I have that I talked about a little bit before we started recording is it's another cheat, but I want to celebrate like every time the Doctor changes on Doctor Who is effectively like a series finale on that Doctor. And so specifically shouting out the end of David Tennant's time as well as Matt Smith's time. I think both of them have incredible send-off episodes that are celebrations of who they were as the Doctor, and who they were in their time. In many cases, like with Tennant, you have basically like he literally like walks down memory lane kind of thing with taking the TARDIS as he's turning and as he's regenerating. He goes back and visits all of his other companions over time, and we get to see kind of where they've all ended up in their various lives. And then Matt Smith also has like a beautiful, he as the Doctor who never stays still, stays in one town in Christmas for years and years and years to defend it from all the terrors of the universe or whatever. And then he kind of gets a beautiful send-off both with Clara, and then there's also a nice little Amelia Pond moment. She comes back and makes a little cameo there, despite having been gone in a way that the Doctor couldn't go see her again. The way that she comes back is a beautiful little send-off. And both of them in their like final speeches as the Doctor get incredibly beautiful like send-off speeches, celebrating who they were, the kind of Doctor they were, and Matt Smith, more so than David Tennant, is very much talking to the audience as Matt Smith, almost more so than as the Doctor. Like he talks about like, I will always remember these days when I was the Doctor, being like a very meta level thing that Peter Capaldi has as well in his send off. There's a heavy like influence of that kind of send off, but I think Tennant and Smith in particular have just a more iconic go of it. So shout out to Doctor Who's quote unquote series finales as well.
David Tennant's I'll touch on just briefly a bit, is such a good, because right, like I feel like every Doctor, we talked about this off air, like every Doctor kind of has either like a buzzword or like a big theme of who they are, and I feel like so much of Tennant's is love in a lot of ways, and particularly just love for the people around him, love for all the different kind of planets and species and creatures, and then obviously boiled down to a love for Rose, and a love for, I think, his life. And so to get that final kind of farewell tour, 'cause that's the thing, like so much of Tennant's last episode is just what I always kind of called the farewell tour, where he just goes and visits everyone else, because he beats the Master in like 15 minutes, and then she's like, all right, cool, now I'm going to go see everyone, as I kind of slowly, suffer the wounds of that defeat. And seeing everyone is so like Donna's wedding, like it's just like it's all so beautifully done, and getting that final exchange with Rose and you're gonna have a great year. It's such a perfect way to kind of have the two of them who I think do have this just such kind of iconic dynamic and relationship, right? Like so much of Tennant's tenure is built around Rose, even after she's gone, because she's only in that first season with him, but she's always kind of looming over everything. And to get that to be his like last kind of moments are seeing her one more time and talking to her one more time, and then down to him kind of famously saying like, "I don't want to go," right? Like it's such a good sad farewell to Tennant, and it is kind of the unfortunate reality of like how the show works. But like, I always wish they didn't do the regenerations until the first episode of the next season. Like I've always thought like Tennant's "I don't want to go" it would be made more powerful if it kind of cuts on that. And like you don't get to see Matt Smith do Matt Smith things, and like Matt Smith's goodbyes made more powerful if you don't have like the Peter Capaldi-ness of his. And I understand why they don't. They want to show like the new person in it, but like both of those two in particular get such beautiful, moving farewells that I think are earned by their kind of fan favorite, iconic statuses of their portrayals of the Doctor. That they're absolutely great mentions as well on this list.
Yeah. Even Christopher Eccleston there as as the first of this new incarnation, like he gets it's probably my favorite moment of his year as the Doctor is his little send off, talking about how great he was and how fabulous Rose was. And it's just like I just don't really resonate with him as much, but to Tennant in particular, like I think Rose gets that last little beat because she was the one there at the beginning, and she is, present throughout. Because in Tennant's time, he has a season with Rose, he has a season with Martha, and then he has a season with Donna. But in the Donna season, Rose basically makes her way back across, and very much like the finale of that ends up being, almost like a Rose, companion episode. And then Tennant has those 4 movies, basically the 4 like holiday specials that happened in that year in between, where he has a different companion kind of each go around. So Rose, I think, gets the extra love because if anything, it's the send off to the Russell Davies era as well. Before Stephen Moffat takes over. So Rose, parting ways at that, we don't get like so much of the Matt Smith era starts and basically doesn't pretend that the past didn't exist, but it doesn't reference the past nearly as much as it does, apart from like River Song kind of carries throughout. But you don't get much in the way of like references to Rose or a lot of those other characters. Like you get a very passing one every now and then, but very much like when Moffat took over, he kind of like let the past stay in the past, and let it be like hey, here's a new entry point for people if they want to hop onto the Doctor now.
And I think Tennant's last episode was such a good bookend on that era, like you noted too. I mean, it's literally called The End of Time. Like it is very much kind of a good wrap up to that, to where, like we had kind of talked about on Psych and its movies afterwards. Like I didn't necessarily need more of that. So when we do get those kind of sporadic like either glimpses of like a Rose drawn, something like that afterwards, it's like, all right, cool, that's a nice touch, but it was such a perfect kind of encapsulation and farewell of that era.
Yeah. So I think that can do it for some of our best and worst. We had a lot more bests than we did worst.
It's a positive one.
Shout out to that. Because like for me, so many of the quote unquote worst, it's just like either I didn't think it was as bad as a lot of other people did. Like one of the ones we talked about in the last thing that we didn't really touch on here was Lost. Like I don't think Lost is a bad final episode or even a bad final season, but a lot of people do. But since I don't, I really can't speak to it as much. And so like a lot of season finales, if I don't think it's like super great or like really egregious in the bad category. I just kind of like, it's like, okay, it was a season finale, or it was a series finale. Like I went through prior to this conversation, because I have basically 2 DVD bookshelves from back when I was like collecting DVDs in the era before streaming, and like one of them is movies, and then the other is just TV shows that I have the series of, or I have partial seasons of, and like I have Dexter up there, but I only have like the first 5 seasons of Dexter because that's where I fell off from the show. I know from the internet that Dexter has a terrible series finale, but I didn't watch it, so I can't really speak to it for this. But hey, shout out to them for bringing Dexter back and creating a finale that left the door open to bring Dexter back, I guess. But yeah, like so many of the series I have, like I look at them, I'm like, like I don't really have any strong feelings one way or another on these series finales, so I can kind of leave them out. But celebrating the ones we did, I think we got a good list here. Yeah, it was a good fun conversation.
Yeah.
So shout out to the medium of television,
absolutely,
and its ability to keep us entertained year over year, and hopefully send its characters off with a bang. So that is going to do it for this week's episode, or this month's early access episode. Thank you, Logan, for joining me. You can follow Logan at LeftElogie. Anything out there on the internet you want to give some love to? Again, these always have to exist in a weird like time bubble, but anything you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, I'll give a shout out to the episode that kind of inspired this, which is me and Trevor's episode of That Nerdy Site Show from a month ago at this point. But you should go check that out. Again, you can see more of our larger thoughts on How I Met Your Mother's finale in particular, but we also go over Chuck, The Office, and Parks and Rec a little bit as well there, and Lost, like Trevor mentioned. So you can hear more of the TV thoughts there. Otherwise, by the time this is going live, I would say check out all of our PS5 content that we have probably when this goes live for everyone, right? I'm doing that math right in my head. Yeah. Go check out all of our PS5 content, all of our PS5 thoughts and next-gen thoughts that are going to be happening, and go check all of those out.
Yeah, so this will go out basically Halloween for our patrons,
okay.
and then end of November for our general audience. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey, and kind of echoing that, if you are one of our patrons that are listening to this early, check out our PS5 coverage as it comes out in this month of November, as well as any new stuff we're bringing out here in year 2 of That Nerdy Site. It's not going to be.
I could have just done that. Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's interesting because we're like, just given the state of the world, we're not going to be doing like a like kind of funny anniversary level changes and here's like a whole slate of new stuff. We have some ideas and some things that we're going to be doing, but nothing that's really going to be like coming out on like November 1st. This is our new slate of stuff. We're just kind of going to roll out some new ideas and as they come, but. Check out all of our PlayStation 5 stuff, and then also if you're hearing this when it goes live to the general public, the PlayStation 5 stuff is going to be there, as well as you have year-end stuff to look forward to here as December approaches, and we wrap up 2020 here and the hellscape of a year that it has been.
Yeah.
And if you do want to go back and listen to that the episode where we spoke of some of these and that kind of spawned this episode, that was That Nerdy Site Show episode 50, titled Ghost of Tsushima Legends, because that was the other main topic of the show was Logan and I sitting down with the co-op mode of Ghost of Tsushima. So check both of that, or check that out, as well as everything else we got going on there. You can follow all of that and all of us over at That Nerdy Site, or check out thatnerdysite.com for all the latest content. If you liked what you heard, once again, please rate, review, like, and subscribe. Maybe even consider, if you aren't already, supporting us over on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, where every patron gets early access to episodes just like this one every month. So that's going to do it. Thank you again for listening. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other.